My name is Ken Small and I'm an architect in Las Vegas, Nevada. In my many years of practice, there are quite a few questions that seem to come up over and over again in every project. And one of them is the idea of what is a preliminary design and how does preliminary design work and how do we do it and when do we do it. So I decided to make this video to explain what that process is in a little bit more detail. It's mentioned in some of our other videos. Do take a look at those also. So a lot of people will wait to hire their architect until after they've signed a lease or after they've purchased their property, and that can work out for you, but a lot of times it's better to begin at the architect's office. And the reason is that in the course of the preliminary design process, you will find out some things that you have a need for that may not have been readily apparent during the purchasing process. And it's also possible that in projects that are commercial remodeling type projects, that you'll want to know about these discoveries before you agree to a lease rate, because if there are problems, if there are things that you're going to have to pay for, then these are things that you can go back to the landlord at your strip retail center or your office building and ask them to remedy out of their pocket instead of you having to remedy them out of your pocket. So most people will bring into our office some sort of a preliminary sketch if they're trying to do a project that shows what it will look like, and we can work with that, and architects are very much used to working with that. But in fact, because of fire codes for things like exiting and other issues, it often doesn't end up being what the end product looks like. It may end up being a distraction that you have to work your way through deciding that you don't want to do. But if you're going to do that, then I will suggest that you take this step before, and if you're not going to do that, then the step I'm about to suggest is the one that I would ask you to bring to our office. If you don't, no problem at all. We're used to asking questions, but if you're trying to expedite the process, if you're trying to get your head straight on what it is that you want, then this will be the first thing that we're going to do. Now, just for a minute, let me say, a lot of people call us and they ask, how much are plans, or how much will a building cost? And I always say to them, so if you walk into a restaurant and you ask how much is a meal, then they're going to say, well, what meal do you want? And if your answer is, I don't know, then that's the answer that you're going to get back. And it's exactly the same thing for construction projects. If you don't know what you want, then we really can't give you any idea what it's going to cost. And because of the level of complication that occurs in site planning and going from one city jurisdiction to a county jurisdiction to a more rural jurisdiction, the rules can be dramatically different on what it is you have to have. And so what we suggest is that we do a preliminary design concept. And the idea of the preliminary design concept is, as it relates to the restaurant analogy, that now you have something to tell the waitress, this is what I want. I want steak and lobster, I want hamburger and french fries, whatever it is you want. So say you're not an aspiring architectural designer and you haven't done your own preliminary design sketch, then get out an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and a pencil and make yourself a list of what you want. Now, using the idea of, say, a commercial office building, then you could say, I need 25 offices for a mid-level manager staff. And then you can decide for yourself, how big is a mid-level manager's office? And if a mid-level manager's office is 10 by 12, then write that down. If you don't know how big you want, then you can say the mid-level manager's office has a desk, a chair for the manager, 2 side chairs, 3 file cabinets, whatever. And then you can say, I need an upper-level manager's office, and what does that have in it? And so on down the line. Now, after you add up the entire list of all the items add 15% minimum. And what is 15%? The wall thicknesses, corridors, mechanical spaces, things like that. Now, if you're doing a freestanding building and the building has porches or covered areas that are not internal to the building, a garage on a large house or something like that, then at the very bottom of the list, include those as separate items. Now, if your room sizes turn out to be in square feet, so if you say mid-level managers are going to have 10 by 12, then 120 square feet, and you're an accountant, you're a mid-level manager, you're an upper-level manager, and you don't aspire to be an architectural designer, put all that into a spreadsheet and tally it up, and you know how many square feet you need. I can't tell you how many people have showed up here having signed a lease for a 4,000 square foot office space, and then they start writing out the list or telling us the list of, oh, I've got Bob over here and Bob this and he needs that, and I've got Nancy over here and she needs this and she needs that. And after they get through telling us Bob, Nancy, John, Drew, Sally, Eddie, all the names of all the people, and we realize that they all have exactly the same needs, we can probably work it out to, oh, these are all the mid-level managers, and they all get a 10 by 12 office of 120 square feet. And then we add that up with all the other things that you need, the break room, your restrooms, all those other things, and we find out that the space you just signed a lease for is too small. So this can be frustrating and embarrassing, and it's hard to get out of leases once you've signed one. But the important thing is that sometimes after we design the floor plan, the landlord doesn't want what you just designed. And so if you do yourself a little preliminary spreadsheet like this, and you figure out how many square feet you have, at least when you go sign a lease, you know you've signed a lease for the right amount of square feet that you need, or I would say add some to that, honestly, just to make sure you have enough. But then with respect to layout, when we're laying the whole thing out and we're getting rooms placed here and there, then you want to make sure that you don't need to add a door, which the landlord might object to, or something like that. So we take your list of rooms, whether you're doing, most people that are watching these videos are going to do a house. So if you're doing a big house, your architect would take your list of rooms and figure out what goes on the front of the house and what goes on the back, and who likes the morning light, and dining room to catch the sunset or the view or whatever, and places them all around. And then once you have a general layout, and this is not something you're going to take hours and hours and hours to do, then you can figure out that, hey, you might want the lot on the south side of the street or on the north side of the street. And if we're doing a tenant improvement and you have a specific existing space that you want something to go into, then you can turn back to the landlord and say, hey, I've got to cut a hole in this structural wall right here, and we're going to have to pour some concrete outside. And is the landlord ever going to say no to that before you have the lease? Not in my experience, not in 25 years have I ever had a landlord say no prior to signing the lease. But after the lease is signed, some nameless, faceless bureaucrat on the other side of the country that owns the real estate investment trust or manages it may say, oh, our standard policy, we don't let anybody do any structural modifications to the building, or we don't allow whatever it is you're suggesting. So you take that sketch of what you want and you attach it to the lease. And then when it's attached to the lease, it's attached with a clause that says that this is allowed. Not that that's what you're obligated to do, but that it's allowed, so that you can have peace of mind knowing that this is something that can be done. So after we have your list of rooms with all your needs, and again, going back to the analogy of the house, if you don't want to take a tape measure around and figure out how big the kid's bedroom needs to be, doesn't really matter that much, because when you're moving things around, designing a house, it's probably going to get bigger or smaller, but just give us your wish list. Well, I'd like to have a double side-by-side pair of beds for the twins' bedroom, not bunk beds. Okay, fine. And each of them needs to have their own dresser. Okay, fine. And each of them needs to have their desk. Now we have an idea of how big the room is from that. And when we're designing it, we'll lay it out so that we can see where the furniture pieces go. So what does a preliminary design look like? I'm going to give you a few examples here. Now, frequently we do things on computer-aided drafting, but if you're coming in for a quick preliminary design, the famous architect's napkin sketch is typically what ends up happening. So here we have just a rough sketch that was done for a coffee shop. This was in a casino a few years ago, and you can see in looking at it, it shows all the tables. So very important to the restaurant manager. How many tables have I got? How many people can I seat? And so another one here, big medical marijuana grow house. Just a rough sketch that gives them an idea of the general shape of the building so that they can get an idea if it will fit on the lot. And that's the key importance when you're designing a ground-up building, is what will fit on the lot. Another one here, this is a group home that they had an existing building and they were going to gut and completely remodel it. So this drawing right here shows what it looked like after the design was completed. And then you can take this preliminary design sketch. Here I'm going to give you one more. This is just an area of a hospital, not a whole hospital, but a circulation area where people are coming and going. And again, the question was here, how many people can we seat? So you can take that preliminary design sketch and you cannot get bids on it. It is not enough information to bid general contractors. But if you have a good, honest general contractor with a good reputation, they can look at that and they can talk to you for a little while and they can tell you what price range you're in. And so again, very important, don't sign the lease if you don't think you can afford it. Do the preliminary design sketch and then show it to a contractor, and if he says that's going to be $500,000 and you have $50,000, then all you've wasted is the preliminary design sketch fee and you found out that you can't do it. But if it comes in pretty close, you're back to the same situation again. You haven't signed the lease yet, go to the landlord and tell the landlord, hey, I need $30 a square foot for your contribution to the build out. They call that a build out allowance. And if Mr. Landlord, if you have to raise the rent a bit to give us a build out allowance, that's the way it works. But I need a build out allowance to move in here, and I'm going to put $250,000 into my restaurant, and so I want you to put in $50,000. And the landlord's going to look at that, and they're going to look at your track record and your loanability and decide whether they want to do it or not. But better that than sign the lease and find out that you're $50,000 short and then have to somehow get out of the lease. So I highly recommend that you do this before purchasing or signing any leases. We also have another step for this process. The ones that I just showed you were mostly interior remodel projects, but for a ground-up project, a next step that's a good one to think about is taking it down to planning and zoning to find out what their take is on the preliminary design concept. So I'll talk about that in my next video. Thanks a lot. Ken Small, Las Vegas, Nevada architect. Have a great day.